I'm Meg Kennard, national politics reporter for the Associated Press. Elections in states across the country happen in a variety of ways, and all states have different rules for when they determine a race will be over, when a race is considered won by one candidate or the other. One of the states that we're watching very closely heading into the midterm elections is Georgia, which has a runoff system in place, particularly for their U.S. Senate race, which is one of those ones across the country that is tightening and has gotten a lot closer in these closing weeks of the 2022 midterm campaign. In Georgia, that runoff election happens when no candidate gets more than 50% of votes cast. So theoretically, that could be 50% of the vote plus one additional vote. Those runoff elections in Georgia are set to happen 4 weeks, if they're necessary, after November 8th. So this year, that would be on December 6th. In Georgia in 2020, the balance of power in the U.S. Senate literally came down to two runoff elections. On one hand, you had Senator David Perdue, the Republican, facing a challenge from Democrat Jon Ossoff. In another race, you had Kelly Loeffler, the Republican incumbent after her special appointment, facing a challenge from Democrat Raphael Warnock. Both of those elections were tight all the way through, and both of them went to runoff elections that weren't decided until early 2021. This year, there are 35 Senate seats that are currently up for grabs in the 2022 midterms. This is a closely divided Senate with 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans. Every Senate race across the country is being closely watched, but particularly now coming back to Georgia, where it's already been proven that these Senate races can be very closely contested. This time, there are three candidates in the race who could potentially force that runoff scenario. There's Democrat incumbent Raphael Warnock, his Republican challenger Herschel Walker, and also a Libertarian candidate, Chase Oliver, who hasn't been shown to be garnering a ton of support at the polls, but he could potentially gain enough votes in the general election to force that runoff scenario. That's where it's really important to remember all it takes for a candidate to be forced into a runoff is not quite making the 50% threshold. When you have three candidates in a race, sometimes it is very hard for one of them to get a simple majority and therefore win the general election outright.